My dad let his girlfriend kick me out of my home, but when I told them I've owned the house since age 11, the gold digger was exposed, and my father lost everything. I'm 23 years old. I'm in college, and I technically own a house that I inherited from my grandparents when I was 11, right after my mom died of cancer. And yeah, I say technically because for years nobody really acted like it was mine. You know? It was just the house where we lived. Period. But what happened like 2 years ago basically exploded my relationship with my dad in a way I never imagined. And even though things are better now, I don't think I'll ever forget that horrible feeling of betrayal I felt. I guess I should start at the beginning so it makes sense. When my mom died, I was 11 and my dad worked out of town. Like, he traveled a lot for his job. So my maternal grandparents decided to leave us their house in their will because they knew we were going to need stability. It was a nice house, not huge but comfortable, just outside the city. They put it directly in my name with a trust until I turned 18, and my dad could obviously live there with me, but legally it was mine. At the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. Honestly, I just knew I missed my mom, and that the house smelled like the cookies my grandma made on Sundays. The years went by and my dad and I lived alone in that house. He tried to be present when he could, but his job was demanding. I got used to being pretty independent from a young age. I cooked, cleaned my room, did my homework, that kind of stuff. When I turned 18, my dad formally explained to me that the house was mine. We signed some papers with the family lawyer, but we kept living the same way as always. He paid for utilities and food. I focused on finishing high school and then getting into college. I'm pretty normal, I guess. So when I was like 21, my dad met Claudia. She was younger than him. I think she was 34, while my dad was 47, and she already had 2 kids from a previous relationship, a 6-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. My dad was super excited, like really happy. And honestly, I was glad for him at first too, because he'd been alone since my mom died and he deserved to be happy, right? Claudia seemed nice when I met her. Her kids were energetic but sweet, and I thought, well, maybe this is going to be okay. After several months of dating, my dad asked me if Claudia and her kids could move into the house with us. He told me she was the woman of his life, that he wanted to form a real family, and that the house was big enough for everyone. I was in my 2nd year of college, basically living in my bubble of classes and homework, so I said yes. I mean, he was my dad. How was I going to say no? Plus, again, I wanted him to be happy. But here's the thing, and this is going to be important later. My dad never told Claudia that the house was mine. She assumed it was my dad's, that he was the owner, and he just never corrected her. Looking back, I should have seen that as a giant red flag, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. At first, everything was fine. Claudia was nice to me. Her kids ran around the whole house making noise but nothing terrible. My dad was happy. I spent most of my time in my room or at college anyway, so the changes didn't affect me that much. Claudia cooked pretty well. That was a plus. And sometimes we'd have family dinners on weekends that felt almost normal. Almost. But there were weird little moments, like when Claudia started reorganizing things in the house without asking, or when she told me my room was too big for one person and that maybe the kids needed more space. I just laughed awkwardly and changed the subject because I didn't want to cause problems. Then, like 6 months after they moved in, Claudia got pregnant. My dad was over the moon. Literally, couldn't stop smiling. He talked all the time about his new baby and how it was going to be different this time, because he'd be more present. You know, all that stuff. I was genuinely happy for him, like, okay, he's going to have another kid, great. But things got weird almost immediately after they announced the pregnancy. Claudia started making comments about the house, about how we needed more space, about how her mom wanted to move in with us to help with the baby. And one day, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich after class when Claudia came in and basically dropped the bomb on me. She said, "Sophia, I need to talk to you about your living situation." I was like, "My what?" And she kept explaining that with the baby on the way and her mom coming to help, the house was going to feel very cramped, and that she and my dad had been talking and thought it would be best if I looked for my own place. That I was already 22. That it was time to be independent. That they needed the space for the real family. The real family. Those were her exact words. The real family. Like I wasn't part of that family. Like I was just a tenant or something. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Honestly, I said, "Wait, My dad is okay with this? And she said yes, that they'd talked at length about it and that he felt it was best for everyone. I couldn't believe it. Like my dad wants to kick me out of the house where I grew up, where my grandparents lived. Really? I told her I needed to talk to my dad directly about it. Claudia got a little defensive but said okay, talk to him. That night when my dad got home from work, I confronted him. I asked him if it was true that they wanted me to move out. He looked uncomfortable, wouldn't look me in the eyes, and said that Claudia was right that we were going to need more space, that maybe it would be good for me to have my own independence, that they'd help me with the move and the deposit for an apartment. I was so angry and hurt I could barely speak. I said, "This is my house, remember?" And that's when everything exploded. My dad was quiet for a moment, like processing what I said, and then Claudia, who had been listening from the living room, came into the kitchen and said, "What are you talking about? Your house? Honey, this is your dad's house." I looked at her and said, "No. My grandparents left this house to me when I was 11. It's in my name. Legally, it's mine." Claudia's face. Oh my God. I'll never forget that expression. She went completely pale and then turned red, like I could see the veins in her neck, and she turned to look at my dad and yelled at him, "Is this true? Did you lie to me about the house? Have you been living in your daughter's house all this time and never told me?" My dad tried to explain to her that technically, yes, the house was in my name, but that he'd lived there with me since my grandparents died, that he had as much right to be there as I did, that he didn't think it was important to mention. Claudia was furious. She started yelling at him about how could it not be important, that she'd made plans assuming he owned property, that she felt deceived and betrayed. I was standing there in the middle of this massive fight thinking, seriously? She feels betrayed? She was the one trying to kick me out of my own house. The argument lasted like 2 hours. Claudia was crying. My dad was trying to calm her down. I just wanted to disappear. In the end, Claudia said she needed time to think, grabbed her 2 kids and went to her mom's house that same night. My dad sat in the living room with his head in his hands, and I went to my room without saying anything else. I didn't sleep all night. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had gotten to this point. During the next few days, the house was super tense. Claudia came back after 3 days with her kids but barely spoke to me. My dad tried to act like everything was normal, but it wasn't. I started looking for places to stay, like with friends or in the dorms at college, because the atmosphere was unbearable. But then my great-uncle, my grandfather's brother, who had always been like a mentor to me, found out what was happening and called me. He said, "Sophia, that house is yours, and nobody can force you to leave. If your dad and his new family can't respect that, then they're the ones who should look for another place, not you." He was right, obviously. But telling my dad that was another thing. Before I could have that conversation, Claudia started again. One afternoon, she told me they'd thought of another option, that maybe I could sell the house and split the money with my dad, so we'd all have enough to buy or rent our own places. I was like, is she crazy? This house has enormous sentimental value to me. My grandparents left it specifically to me. Why the hell would I sell it to split the money with my dad when he can perfectly well look for his own house? I told her no, absolutely not. My dad heard that conversation and came to talk to me afterwards. He told me I was being selfish, that a house was just a house, that family was more important, that his baby needed a stable home. I said, "And what about me? Don't I matter? Don't I deserve to have a stable home too?" He said I was an adult and should understand that things change, that he was building a new life. Those words hurt more than anything else. Like my own dad was basically choosing his new family over me. Then the inevitable happened. Like 2 weeks after that conversation, Claudia packed all her things, her kids' things, and moved to her mom's house permanently. She told my dad she couldn't live in a house that wasn't his, that she felt humiliated and insecure, and that if he really loved her, he'd move with her. And my dad, oh my God, my dad chose to leave with her. He told me he felt he had no choice, that he was going to be a father again, and needed to be with his family. The word family felt like a knife every time he used it, like I wasn't his family anymore, apparently. Before leaving, he told me that if I didn't sell the house and give him his part, he was going to disown me, that he wasn't going to have anything more to do with me, that he was disappointed in the selfish person I'd become. I just told him, "Do what you have to do." And he left. My dad left my life just like that, after 22 years. because his new wife manipulated him into feeling like I was the problem. The next few months were the hardest of my life, honestly. I lived alone in that big house. The house felt empty and full of memories at the same time. My friends tried to cheer me up. My great-uncle visited often to make sure I was okay. But the truth is, I was devastated. My dad didn't call me, didn't text me, nothing. I found out on Facebook that Claudia had had the baby. A boy. My half-brother that I'd probably never meet. That hurt more than I expected. Like I have a little brother and I don't even know his name. I tried to get on with my life. I focused on college, worked part-time at a coffee shop to pay my expenses, since my dad obviously wasn't helping me with anything anymore. I went out with friends on weekends. So, I wouldn't feel so alone in the house. But there was always this weight on my chest. You know, this feeling that I'd lost my dad for defending something that was legitimately mine. Then, like 8 months after they left, my dad called me out of the blue. I was in class when I saw his name on my phone, and I almost had a heart attack. I waited until I got out to call him back. My hands were shaking as I dialed. He answered, and his voice sounded tired, defeated. He told me he needed to talk to me in person, that it was important. I agreed to meet him at a neutral coffee shop because I didn't want him to come to the house yet. When I saw him at that coffee shop, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, had huge dark circles under his eyes, looked like he'd aged 10 years and 8 months. He sat across from me, and before I could say hello, he started talking. He told me that Claudia and he were getting divorced, that he'd discovered she'd basically been using him from the beginning. Turns out Claudia had thought the whole time that my dad owned a house, that he had more money than he actually did. And when she found out the house was mine, she realized she wasn't going to be able to manipulate him to get property or easy money. My dad explained that during the months they lived together at Claudia's mom's house, she'd been taking money from my dad's accounts little by little, racking up debts in his name, buying expensive things that were supposedly for the baby but that she'd then sell. He found evidence that she had plans to leave him as soon as she had enough money saved, that she'd been talking to a lawyer about how to get maximum child support for her 3 kids. Basically, she was a professional gold digger, and my dad had completely fallen into her trap. He told me he'd gone to court with all the evidence of financial abuse, and the judge had ruled in his favor, that Claudia had to return the money she'd stolen, that she'd basically had a really bad time. And then he apologized to me. He said he'd been an idiot, that he'd chosen wrong, that he'd betrayed his own daughter for a woman who was just using him, and that he understood if I couldn't forgive him. But he needed me to know how sorry he was. I was sitting there listening to him and didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to yell at him and say, "I told you so. I warned you something wasn't right with her." Another part of me just felt sadness for him, because he looked so destroyed and regretful. And there was a small part of me that was still that one-year-old girl who had just lost her mom and just wanted her dad back. I told him I needed time to process everything, that I couldn't just forgive him that quickly after how he'd treated me. He said he understood completely and would wait as long as necessary. Several months passed of difficult conversations. My dad went to therapy, like real therapy with a professional, to work on his issues and understand why he'd allowed Claudia to manipulate him so much. We started meeting for coffee every 2 weeks, just to talk, no pressure. Slowly, very slowly, I started to forgive him. It wasn't easy, and there was still resentment, but I could see he was genuinely trying to be better, to recover our relationship. Eventually, my dad met Elena, who works as a nurse at the city hospital. She's completely different from Claudia, like total opposites. Elena is genuine, kind, has no interest in money or property. She just wanted to meet someone good to share her life with. She has a 20-year-old daughter who's in college too, and when my dad decided he wanted his relationship with Elena to get serious, he told me immediately. He asked me if I'd feel comfortable if Elena and her daughter moved into the house. But this time, before doing anything, he made sure Elena knew the house was mine, that they'd had that conversation explicitly, that there would be no surprises. And it was true. I met Elena, and she was super respectful about everything. She thanked me for allowing them to stay in my house, asked me if there were specific rules I needed them to follow, treated me like the property owner I am. Her daughter is also great. In fact, we get along really well, and sometimes we study together when we're both home. The dynamic is completely different. There's mutual respect and communication, everything that was missing with Claudia. Like 8 months ago, I met Cameron at a college party. He's studying software engineering. and is probably the most understanding and patient person I've ever met. I told him my whole story with my dad, with Claudia, with the house, everything, and he just listened without judging. He told me he admired that I'd defended my boundaries even when it was difficult. We've been dating since then, and 2 months ago he asked me to marry him. I said yes, obviously. My dad cried when I told him I was engaged, but they were happy tears. He told me he was proud of me, that I'd grown so much, that I was stronger than he ever was. Elena is helping me plan the wedding. Her daughter is. I'm going to be one of my bridesmaids. And even though I'll never forget the pain I went through 2 years ago, I feel like we're finally in a good place as a family. Oh, and about Claudia. Because I know you're wondering what happened to her. I found out recently from a mutual friend that she's with a new guy now. Someone who apparently has money but is also super controlling and doesn't let her do anything without his permission. Part of me feels sorry for her because nobody deserves to be in a relationship like that, but another part thinks maybe it's karma, you know? I don't know what happened to my half-brother. If he's okay. If my dad has any kind of contact with him. It's weird to think I have an almost 2-year-old brother. I don't know. But I also don't know if that's ever going to change. What I do know is that defending my house, defending my space, was the right decision, even though at the time I felt like I was destroying my family. My dad had to learn difficult lessons about manipulation and about putting the right people first. I had to learn to set boundaries even with the people I love. And even though the path was horrible and painful, I think we both came out of it as better people. Cameron tells me I'm his inspiration because not many 2-year-olds would have the courage to stand firm like I did, and I guess he's right. At the time, I didn't feel brave at all. I just felt scared and alone. But looking back, I can see that yes, it was an act of courage to defend what was mine. Last week, I was in the garden with Elena, planting flowers. She loves gardening, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, "You know, Sophia, this house is lucky to have you as its owner. You give it life and love the way your grandparents would have wanted." And I think she was right. My grandparents left me this house not just as property but as a legacy, as a symbol that I would always have a place where I belonged no matter what. And even though the road to honoring that legacy was more complicated than anyone would have expected, in the end it was worth it.